we now are moving outside our US bubble, and we're going to be sharing some check-ins with some global perspectives. Two of these we pre-taped because of time zone challenges. One is live. And we're really excited. So we're going to kick this thing off with a conversation that we recorded yesterday with our dear friends and champions at the Music Venue Trust. We are now thrilled to welcome to the conversation Mark, Davyd, and Bev Whitrick from Music Venue Trust, our friends who are based in Barcelona but have been doing historically important organizing work across the UK and throughout Europe for a number of years. I've told this story before, but just to, it makes me happy to think back on it. The first time I met Mark, I saw him speak at the first Music Cities convention. It's been 5 years. And I was one of, I think, 4 Americans at the event. I was there with Danny Grant, and Jesse Elliott, and Julie Suter, and 1 or 2 others. And I almost fell out of my chair. I just took pictures of all the slides. I was texting Ashley Keaton in New Orleans. I was like, this is it. This is the paradigm. This is the framework. This is what we've been looking for forever, in the States, around how do we think about the ladder of venues? How do we think about grassroots venues? How do we talk about this in a way that we haven't done in the States? And over the past bunch of years, it's just been such a pleasure to work with you and your team and watch what you're doing from afar. And you've been a great partner with the Revs Initiative this year. And we're frankly instrumental in the creation of the Chicago Independent Venue League. Mark spent time in DC at our conference a couple of years ago and really helped meet with the Chicago activists, which led to that organization, which, there's a clear through line to NEVA, and so again, it's been amazing, and we're so appreciative of just the community building and field building that you've committed to for a long period of time. So thank you for joining. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. We'll talk to you all some other time. So thank you. So
can I just say there, Michael, it's a circle. It's a circle of thing, because from that first meeting we had, which I think it was in Brighton.
It was. That's right.
What actually has happened was we were able to obviously engage over a number of years, met some fantastic people stateside in Canada, in Australia, obviously. And also what happened was when this crisis hit, I started reaching out, seeing who was doing what internationally, and the work that you were already doing on reopening every venue safely, the Revs Initiative, was absolutely, it came to us at exactly the moment we needed to hear that. And even the title was so brilliantly short and perfect that we immediately said, okay, we have to be in on that part of it, because you have to get the attention of government, and the way that everybody was thinking about it absolutely informed how successful we were with engaging government on it. So, without this turning into 2 TED Talks about the importance of looking internationally and engaging in lots of different initiatives and just looking for what the best practice is, it's been absolutely instrumental to what we've managed to achieve this year, which has been a lot.
Well, and also just led to complete bemusement to some degree that an organisation as small as Music Venue Trust is would have international partners working on such a program. And of course, we've always worked in partnership because we are really tiny. And so it was really great for us because we could say, no, this is a real thing, and there are documents, and, we can share it with you. And I know certainly with Welsh Government, they kind of stopped doing what they were doing and just adopted wholesale an awful lot of revs in what they were looking at for the whole culture sector. So it pushed us forward in the conversations with government in a way that would have been impossible had that partnership not existed.
Yeah, you should do what they're doing in San Francisco and Chicago is an incredibly powerful statement in Wales. You have an opportunity here to be more like San Francisco. Oh, great. Let's just do that.
It's quite appealing,
That's so good. So this session is really focused on this idea of trying to get outside our bubble. And again, as a community in the States and Canada, it feels like all of us are on the same Zoom meetings, we're having the same conversation. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. It's just again. And over the last 2 days of this conference, we've tried to, we're a network and we're a community. And so we want to honor that. And that's really important and at the heart of our work. But it's also important to kind of just get outside a little bit and get some other eyes on what we're doing. And so I just kind of throw it to you. You've observed the American scene. I appreciate the Revs compliments. Thank you very much. But, more broadly, what would you tell us? Like, what would you, if we were asking for some advice and some guidance, or just any sort of perspective on what you're seeing in the States, especially as we move into both an incredibly difficult winter, but hopefully an opportunity to have fundamentally different conversations and different sort of activities, post-COVID, and hopefully a brighter future.
I think I would, that's a big question.
It's a big question.
I think I would, the emergence of NEVA has been amazing. The way that people are coming together. I think, we talked before we came on screen about opportunity and crisis, and I think there has been a crisis here. I think America, US certainly has been slightly behind, if I'm going to be brutally honest with your audience, in terms of recognizing that grassroots music venue sector has had structural problems for a huge number of years. And, it's horrible to talk about the opportunity in this crisis, which has been so devastating for so many people, but you have to do what you can. And if this is an opportunity to bring the venues and the people that care about the community around those venues really forcefully together in a sustainable and structured way, that could be a real turning point, actually, because it isn't just about COVID. It isn't just about this current crisis. There are really serious long-term structural problems in the whole music industry about how we support grassroots artists, the support we put behind community-based venues, the people who run those venues. This crisis is like a magnifying glass. And that magnifying glass includes the opportunity to look at other things, not just to focus in on COVID, but when you're looking at COVID, you can see, we know from conversation with Moose and Dana at NEVA, you have the same problems around ownership that are exhibited elsewhere in the world. Why doesn't the music industry own its own infrastructure? Why are we reliant on commercial landlords and everything else for the spaces we want to perform our culture in? How safe are our spaces for things like this? These are all magnifying glass opportunities. So I hope, certainly it's brought together our sector, and our sector was already pretty together. We're quite proud of that. We were able to respond really quickly because of the work we've done in 5 or 6 years. But I think it could really strengthen what you have in the US. And I think there's a lead role to be played here. It's the biggest music nation on earth. It should have the most organized and most community-based grassroots music activism sector. Well,
and also what you're saying, there is a challenge in hitting the sweet spot, because for the grassroots music venue sector, it's all about people and stories and, why people are passionate about venues and the artists that really credit them with helping develop their careers. But if you don't also have data and hard facts within which to frame the stories, you can't actually really communicate what needs to change and why those venues need the kind of support they've got. So our experience of running Music Venue Trust is that, in 2014, when we formed, we knew that there were problems, but a lot of our evidence was anecdotal. And what we've really done over the years is work out when to and how to survey and collect information in order that we can give really concise information that illustrates what's needed. And I think that's really challenging if you're a young movement. And, that's where I see that we were quite fortunate that when COVID hit, we could respond quite quickly because we had this experience already. And even though our membership has grown massively, we started off with around 600 venues at the beginning of the year. We now have over 900 in our network. So that's a huge amount for what's still quite a small organization. We kind of knew what to do to respond. So that's the challenge, is that sweet spot that marries up the evidential data and what's really important, particularly when talking to governments at all levels, with the real human stories that show why this is so vital.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fantastic advice. And I'm really happy to say, I think all those points track really carefully with some of the things we've been talking about. during this event in terms of democratizing access to data, in terms of thinking more about context. How do we really sort of understand what story data tells us about the realities of the music community, not just about the labor market, things like that. And I think, again, just to amplify something I think that's implied in what both of you said, just being in for the long haul and understanding that, again, we all have to be engaged in the crisis that's in front of us, which is an existential threat to life, to everything. But we also have to understand that this sort of work that you've done that has inspired us is slow and steady and incremental, and there are wins and there are losses, but you just kind of keep moving forward. And hopefully that's something that in the States, we can really take that lesson to heart. Mark and Bev, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you as always. Can't wait to see you in person.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds amazing. Let's hope that's soon.
Cheers.
I'm going to see you.
Thank you.
Well, hello everyone, and good morning, John Wardle, who is
good morning
with us today. Good morning, mate.
Hello, how are you? It's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too, John. We don't have a back end green room, everyone. So John and I are just saying hello for the first time, but it is somewhere close to 7 a.m. in Australia. So thank you, John, for joining us at this ridiculous hour. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here. This is an engaged group of music policy champions who are here with us. But John Wardle is really one of the folks I so admire in this work. I first met him in DC in 2015 at the Music Cities Conference, and we got on quite well. And then we were together at Canadian Music Week in Toronto. And in that time, he said, you should come to Sydney and to Australia. I said, I would love to. And I had the good fortune to go over there in 2016 and present at the first ever Global Cities After Dark conference, which John was very involved in. And I met the Honorable John Graham from the Labour Party in New South Wales. And he and John Wardle have worked together to really accomplish amazing work in Australia. I followed John's work for a long time, and he is the live music officer for the entire country of Australia. So John, could you please introduce yourself and tell us what your role is there and how you managed to get this amazing work going in the country of Australia? Assume the audience doesn't know a whole lot about how Australia is structured.
Right. So we have, we have 8 states and territories over here. And my role with the Live Music Office is to work with the tiers of government. We've got 3 tiers of government. We've got a federal government, we have the states, and then we have our local government. So my role is to work with the music industry across the tiers of government. And I do a lot of work on regulation and strategic planning. So working on liquor licensing, on planning, on building codes, on local government structures, also on funding and identifying priority areas to support investment. The Live Music Office was set up in 2013 with federal funding. It was funded by the Australian government. That funding, we had it up until 2018. Now my role, it's only part-time, and it is supported by APRA-AMCOS, which is the Performing Rights Association. But before the Live Music Office, I was a music teacher. I've been a working musician. I've done a bit of, I've played a little bit in the Deep South in America. I was a music teacher at the university for a while, and I've been a political staffer in the state parliament. So I guess you bring all those things together, and that's there we are. Yeah.
Well, prior to this massive sweeping overhaul that you have helped lead, what was the state of affairs for music in New South Wales?
Well,
music and nightlife.
Yeah, look, New South Wales has had a number of interventions along the way that have really set us back, and they've been regulatory interventions. It seems like every decade we get something that is introduced, often with the best of intentions, but has pretty major unintended consequences. In the late 80s, we had a fire safety planning process that was brought in that meant that if any performance, whether that was a piano in a cafe or whether it was a large-scale concert hall, would all have quite serious fire safety. That really restricted performance from the late 80s, and a lot of venues found themselves caught in red tape there. We had poker machines come in to a lot of our traditional performance spaces. So most of those, I don't know if you've ever been over to New South Wales. There's a lot of gaming machines in our towns. And I think we've moved on from that in some ways, but there was no amelioration of the impacts on the music sector. We've also seen lockouts in the city of Sydney. I think that's made global headlines. In the late night precinct in Sydney in King's Cross, there was 3 times the amount of people on that honeypot effect coming from the Greater Sydney into after midnight into that. And there were tensions, there was land use conflict there. So the government brought in lockouts and essentially shut down King's Cross completely and Oxford Street and the CBD. So we've had festival regulations come in that have been very, very heavy-handed as well. And at the election just in March last year, we were looking at lockouts statewide. We were looking at very complex and hard festival regs, and then of course COVID hit on the 13th of. So yeah, we just had these really sort of big setbacks. Look, I mean, I experienced some of those firsthand as a younger person, and was working at the university, and you're thinking, well, if there's no jobs for tertiary staff, let alone students, what are the barriers here? And so that's really where that's the path I've gone down since then, and just consistently stayed at my post over many years now, and just worked around the clock really, as it is these days, to try and deliver better policy and deliver answers and a way forward.
Well, you deserve a giant celebration because of what you have accomplished, John. It's being described as a once-in-a-lifetime suite of changes by the Fringe Festival promoter. And it's just so, the magnitude of it is stunning. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because your tenacity and determination to get this done has been fundamental to these changes happening. But it's, if I understand it right, it's 600 pieces of legislation that have been overhauled with 60 amendments to the bill. Is that correct?
Look, for the live, it is a broad review of the Liquor Licensing Act in New South Wales, but there's also planning, there's building codes, there's local government, there's COVID responses around the use of roads. So I think for our stuff, there's about 60 amendments in total. So there's a couple of things here, what's been done and how it was done. From my desk, as you know, Kate, I work around the country. We're able, usually we work with a single instrument, whether that's liquor licensing or planning or building, and a single agency in a single place. Where in this circumstance, we've been able to do all of those regulatory levers, and as we know, they're very complicated and are interrelated. So this is the only other time we've done liquor planning and building in a single reform was in South Australia in 2016. So here we've been able to bring a load of things from around the country into one place. And I can explain it to you. In Queensland, in the state of Queensland, they have a special entertainment precinct model, which removes the duplication around who regulates sound and noise to the capital city. they regulate the sound. It's not in the Liquor Act, which it is for the rest of the state. You can align your planning controls, your acoustic privacy and your residential development. You can also coordinate your transport, your marketing, your promotion. It works really well, but primarily the function is to remove the duplication. So in New South Wales here, we've got 7 agencies that regulate sound or noise. And I use sound or noise. In the new laws that they're interchangeable, sound and noise. You can be a business that has invested very heavily in acoustic reports, in attenuation, in designing your business so that it is compliant. But if there's a complaint against you, you're in a noise process. You're immediately on the back foot because you're targeted as a polluter. We want to get back to the science, get back to the and remove the duplication. So that's a great thing. It comes from Queensland, from South Australia, and that's been there since 2006. In South Australia,
Okay, I think he will be trying to get back on with us in just a second, everyone. So if you can hold tight, he is calling in from halfway around the world. So I think we will have him back here shortly. But meanwhile, I'll tell you about some of the things that are going on that John hasn't referenced yet in Australia. Australia is crossing today their 14th day with 0 COVID cases. Oh, he's not back. I thought he was. 0 COVID cases in a country the size of Australia. I hope this inspires you all to know that we can get there, right? They are having soccer games in Australia and New Zealand with 46,000 people right now. Why? Because their leadership knew how to handle COVID in a way we have not done in this country. And so it's really hopeful to see these countries getting back online and being able to have large groups gather. And I just thought that might be of interest to you all. John is back with us. There he is in front of his beautiful beach that he posts photos of all the time. Can you hear us?
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. Please.
I'm up in town at the moment, and the internet should be working. So, look, there's just a lot going on. It's been a pretty intense month, but we've just been able to pull together things from around the country in a single place. So, I think that's really exciting.
Well, excellent. John, one of the many things, and this is minor compared to what you've accomplished, but I thought it was so witty that you had a campaign called #FreeTheMirrorBall, which really instantly sort of tells the story of the work you're trying to do at some level. It was brilliant to do that, I thought.
Well, up until now, if you have a venue, say you're a cafe or a restaurant, if you've got a mirror ball in there, you can be prosecuted for having the wrong type of liquor license. You need to have a nightclub license. Quite incredible. And we regulate genres in New South Wales, what sort of music you can play. There's conditions that say you can only play country music or soft jazz or have 3 musicians or face north or south. The list goes on. There's hundreds and hundreds of these conditions. I was once a witness in a court case for a venue that was prosecuted for 14 offences of having rock music in their venue. Those are going.
Well, it's amazing that you have battled that successfully, John. You are really helping lead the world on this kind of reform. So it is phenomenal, and we are just deeply honored to have you with us today. I know you're so humble all the time. That's why I have to tell you all about the greatness of John Wardle, because he never will.
Scott's just put a note, that's some crazy shit. Well, it is some crazy shit. But there's all sorts of crazy shit goes on when you look behind the curtains and, in the way we regulate our industry. Yeah.
Yes, we have some crazy shit going on in our parts as well, but yours was extraordinary. So I am just so delighted that you have been able to overhaul it, John. What do you see as next steps? I mean, this has been your work for years. What where are you going to put your focus now? Or does it continue?
My focus, I think, is going to be is going to be just getting out in my little boat and catching a few fish and playing some pedal steel guitar and having a bit of a rest. We've got to make these things work in New South Wales. I think some of the planning sides of things, the building codes and the exempt development and the entertainment precincts, they're going to take some work in interfacing into the planning scheme. So, I'd like to have a bit of time out, actually.
You absolutely deserve it, and I look forward to seeing pictures of you in your boat fishing and all of that. John, you live in such a beautiful place. I want to ask you a couple more questions, if I could.
Look,
how important was it for you to find the Honorable John Graham and partner with him on moving this forward? He's a legislator in New South Wales in the Labor Party.
That's right. Look, John Graham was instrumental in many of these changes. And he's not, the Labor Party aren't in government at the moment. It's the Conservatives who are in government. And it's fascinating how this was achieved. John has been a very serious, he's one of the best music industry advocates I've ever met. And he's not part of our industry. He's in the state parliament. The government put up a bill to change the Liquor Act, and John Graham from opposition said, okay, well, we've been through many parliamentary inquiries around our industry. Many of the capital cities have got plans in New South Wales. There's plans in the live music plans in many of the councils, in regional and the CBD. So there's no learning curve for so many people in government and in state and local government. And so we're able to very quickly say, well, the Act is open for amendment. Let's put a bunch of best practice in, and worked with us very closely. It's been quite a very intense and very fast process, and a lot of work in the Parliament, in the corridors, and in.
I think we lost John again. Hopefully he'll be back in a second. There is one more thing I wanted to ask him about that I thought you all would find so intriguing. Let's see if he comes back.
Why don't we can do some role play, and I'll be John, and
Okay.
You can ask the question and I'll answer as John.
John, you've been involved in helping develop an amazing thing called Great Southern Nights. Can you tell me about the Great Southern Nights 1000 concerts you are involved with across Australia right now?
Yeah, well, we wanted to do 1,000 concerts and do them with the Great Nights concept. So we did 1,000 of them, and they're really great, and they're so Southern, and I'm not going to do an accent. Although
I know. Well, he may or may not be coming back with us. I understand he's got a radio interview following this. He's a man right now, of course, having got this done. So if we don't get to have John back, thanks for filling in there, Michael. And yes, indeed, Great Southern Nights, 1,000 outdoor live music concerts sponsored by the Australian government, happening across the country right now. That is their revival.
it's so good.
Let's get music back. Let's get
It's
music
so good.
alive, right? So I think our good mate, John Wardle, is not able to reconnect. And I know we've got another session right behind his. I think I'm going to pass it back to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Kate, and thank you for chasing down John, and obviously huge appreciation for John joining us so early in the morning and sharing the story, which is the kind of inspiration I think we all need, both in terms of the policy wins, in terms of even the sense of a country that is gotten on the right side of the COVID crisis and is able to rebuild. So we're going to finish this part of our session with one more conversation, one that we pre-taped earlier this week with our dear friend Lynn Ross from Vancouver, BC, and Lynn's going to share some information about a different side of the issues that we're dealing with that frankly haven't come up, I don't think, yet in the last 2 days. So I'm really glad to share this conversation we had with Lynn, and then we'll be back with you live. All right, welcome back. We are super excited to be joined by our dear friend from Vancouver, BC, Lynn Ross. Lynn, thanks for joining.
Hi.
For those who have not had a chance to meet you, just give a little bit of context on the work that you've done in music and music activism for maybe more years than you care to admit publicly.
I'm not ashamed of my age, Michael.
Just go.
I started in the music industry as a music journalist. I don't even know if you know that, Michael. At U of T, and then I worked at SOCAN, Society of Composers, Authors, Music Publishers in Canada, equivalent to BMI and ASCAP in the States. I worked there for almost 20 years. So in various areas, distribution, licensing, most of it in member services. So by the time that I left there, I was managing the Vancouver office and Western Canada. And I had 2 clients, myself, and I looked after Bryan Adams and Chad Kroeger from Nickelback. Those were the two accounts that I didn't kind of, give to anyone else because, quite frankly, they were my favorite. And since then, I worked in a number of nonprofits in music, and my last gig was at the City of Vancouver, where I developed the music strategy for the city. So I was there for 2 years on a contract, and from there I went to where I am now is PAL, Vancouver, and it's performing arts lodges and studios, and it's essentially nonprofit housing for artists with performance space.
I can't wait to dig into that. Before we go into that work, again, this particular session is really, again, trying to step outside of our US bubble, and the idea that, a lot of us here in America feel like we've been on the same Zoom calls with the same people, throughout the year, talking about the same things. And we really, it's so helpful and important to kind of get outside that bubble, to get an outside pair of eyes. And certainly Music Policy Forum would not exist without our Canadian partners and friends. And let me just ask you, big picture, you did a lot of developments over the last couple of years in the United States in terms of music activism and policy work. And, big picture, what have you observed just kind of looking over the border in terms of what's been happening in America, this year, but a little bit bigger picture in terms of music and activism?
Well, I mean, certainly everyone's had to kind of step back, and take a broader view of what's been going on. And, just that the live music industry, obviously there hasn't been one or much of one at all in 2020, and people have had to pivot and be creative, more creative than ever, certainly. But really, for musicians especially, their whole livelihood is touring. So, I mean, it really, it got me thinking again about, streaming and, I know this conference isn't about that, but just really how little musicians are getting paid, from streaming. That's what really got me, that, they're still relying on, traditional radio still pays, and music on television, and, all your ASCAP and BMI back-end money. But, streaming services, there has to be something done there that's just, it's certainly just not, it's not right. It's not fair.
Yeah. And that's something, we're talking a lot about, over these 2 days. And, President-elect Biden has got this, slogan, which is really kind of hackneyed and corny, but it actually is incredibly apt, which is Build Back Better. And that's what I think a lot of us have been thinking about in the United States music industry. Is it's not just about restarting and getting back to what we were doing. It's like we need to fundamentally have a sort of a systematic rethink about everything to do with music and music ecosystems. And it's been great over the last couple of days, to kind of explore whether it's antitrust or a lot of different things that we need to be, again, kind of coming to the table with some concrete ideas about what we could do and fundamentally differently. I mean, one thing that you're working on now that I think is incredibly relevant, again, is, we can't just, again, have a conversation about surviving 2020 and surviving COVID. We need to be thinking big picture. And one of the biggest challenges facing all American cities whether you're a musician or music worker or just a worker, is livability and the ability to afford housing, afford just basic sort of needs in a really, really complicated economic time. Again, even transcending the COVID stuff. Could you talk a little bit about what you've been working on in Vancouver related to artist housing, which I think is particularly interesting as we think about what our community needs to be talking about with the next administration moving forward?
Well, it is. We had a study done here in the city of Vancouver a couple of years ago, and that was number one on everyone's list from musicians and people who work in the music industry. That in Vancouver especially, you're looking at $1,000 a square foot. It's just, and rent is really, it's just really, really like it's not sustainable. It's not affordable, especially for musicians. So this model, the PAL model anyway, and there are PALs all across Canada, performing arts lodges and studios, is that it's rent. It's a mix, but it's mostly rent geared to income. So you're paying, if you earn less, you're paying less rent. So and it's way below market. I should say that, like anyone who is during these times, we've been lucky in Canada having government funding throughout this, and it's certainly not enough. But I don't know of anyone who's lost their home or and we can't evict anyone here either. And we had a rent freeze in BC. They just announced that no one is allowed to, landlords aren't allowed to increase any rent until at least July of next year. Mm-hmm. So, things like that have really helped. But on our end, with social housing for artists, we're going to look at that because it's done yearly. And, those people, the rent geared to income, their rent certainly will go down. So, those sort of things that, we're looking at. It's great to have, or will be when we're allowed to open up again, to have performance space in the building is really great too, because these people are artists. So
I think that's so interesting. And I think a couple of takeaways potentially for our audience, in this conversation, I think there's two. I think one is certainly you have, roughly 2 decades experience of the sort of nonprofit government partnership that has been supporting artist housing. And as the states becomes, as organizations like ArtSpace and others are dealing with similar issues, it'll be really helpful, I think, for policymakers here in the States to understand that federal funding model in Canada and what could be potentially applied here in the States, or a version of that. I think the other is an initiative that many of our colleagues were working on, that you were involved with, and others, the Cascadia Music Corridor, which is an effort to sort of take a regional approach, bringing together Pacific Northwest music communities, including Seattle, Boise, Portland, Anchorage, Vancouver. And, ideally, again, we were so fortunate earlier to hear from County Executive Constantine, and, part of those networks that you are part of, of just literal like music community leaders and policymakers and nonprofit leaders who are really puzzling through the very practical pieces of this. Those conversations should be accelerating in the next couple of years. So, we're really learning from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cascadia would be great to really, explore this model. I think it would work really, really well for them. I worked in government, so there's no shortage of, social housing here in Vancouver and BC, but artists want to be people within their community. They're probably not going to apply for social housing that is open or available to everyone. So, this is just really, really specific, and it's for performing arts. And I would say most people in our buildings are musicians.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to digging in to learn more about that. And we appreciate you joining us for a few minutes here this afternoon. And we can't wait to when we can be back to see you in person.
Virtual hug.
Thank you.
Okay, hey, we're back, and I think we've got John Wardle with us for a few minutes. Can you hear me, John?
Yes, I can hear you. I've jumped onto my phone, which I think should be a bit more stable. But I think I've tried to set the video on, but it doesn't seem. I think you've disabled it.
Okay. Back end Paulus and Alex, if it's disabled, can you put John back on video? Oh, there you are.
There we go. Yeah. Look, I'm
Terrific.
so sorry. This connection's horrible. I'm up in Sydney, and it's anyway. Where were we, Kate?
Well, after you dropped out of the video, Michael Brady stepped in to fill in for you, and I asked him to tell us all about Great Southern Nights, and he did his best. But do you care to tell us at all about Great Southern Nights? It's inspirational to us, John, that those concerts are happening in Australia.
Yes, look, and I think in next month Queensland venues are going to go to 100% capacity.
Wow.
So look, we are in a lot better shape actually here in Australia than many other parts of the world.
Yes, and we admire that greatly because we are in terrible shape here, as I'm sure you've still heard. In fact, we have a full entertainment ban in the state of Washington right now, John. So not even a busker can perform. A single comedian cannot take the stage right now. We are really in a dangerous state with COVID, and it's not nearly under control yet. So bravo to you and your country's leaders for handling it much better than we did here.
Look, we have seen the state of Victoria were in a very serious lockdown for a very long time, but they have come through it, and they are coming through it. So it just does require very serious interventions, but these things will pass.
Yes, and we certainly look forward to that day and hope we still have some live music venues around when we get to that day. They are facing a rather existential threat if there is not some federal intervention with some funding to help them survive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what can you tell us all, these music policy warriors who are doing this work all over North America? We have folks here from Canada with us as well. What has inspired you and your drive to keep your foot on the pedal when it looks so dark out there, John? And now you're at this glorious moment of tenacity. How do you do that?
Well, if you're still at your post, when an opportunity comes up like this, when you've been through all these inquiries and all of these things, and you think this is interminable, and then suddenly a window comes up and you've got a chance to run through the gap. So it's just staying at your post, and that is really, really hard. There's a couple of principles that guide the strategic thinking for me. One is overlap. A lot of the barriers that we can face are in overlapping functions between duplication in instruments from a regulatory perspective. So targeting those overlaps. Also, regulations don't effectively scale between smaller and larger scale uses in many ways, at least in this country. So finding a tiered approach so that the grassroots venues are not regulated the same as medium and larger venues. The other thing that I would say that I find very useful for you all is I've got a table of all the states and territories in Australia and various components, and I map them so that on one page I can put it in front of a decision maker and say, whichever it is, whether it's liquor licensing, whether it's planning, whether it's building, whether it's funding, whether it is strategic planning, capital city strategies, I've got a table of who has it and who doesn't. And so even I can put that in front of somebody and communicate how the whole country looks on a single page. You've got many more states and territories that we do, but I just find that a really powerful tool so that whatever you are doing, you can have a table and you can put it in front of someone and say, we need this, they've got it, we don't have it. And, I continue to do that to this day. It's really, I've actually did draw one up for North America a few years ago and for Canada, but, I've just got plenty going on over here myself. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe they're useful things for me. You know, they're like key principles for me that when I've got those front and centre, looking at duplication in regulation, looking at scalability, comparing people to each other, those are really powerful ways to achieve change.
Yes, thank you for that. And we have seen that inspire some electeds here when we say, do you know what Austin, Texas is doing, right? Like comparing music scenes to show them how they could be better and where there are models that we can look at to really replicate or learn from. Yeah. I have another question for you, John. How has music activism helped or hindered your work? I know there was the big inquiry where lots of people sent letters to the parliament about the overhaul of legislation and the importance of supporting the arts, music, and culture sector. How important has activism been in Australia?
Look, it's incredibly important. It's extremely important. In New South Wales, we've had a series of parliamentary inquiries into the night economy, into COVID, into grants, into funding, into the music and performance industry. These are really useful things for a parliament to do. If you've got a roadblock, if you're not being funded, if there's regulatory issues, then finding some sympathisers within the legislature at the state or city level and doing a bit of an investigation. I've done a lot of the capital city plans, done a lot of all of this stuff will build a critical mass so that once, you know, you will find your opportunities if you stay with it. You will find them.
Excellent. We only have a few more minutes, John. What do you want us to know? What else can you share that would be of interest to this audience?
I think let's talk about COVID. We're now seeing significant investment into the private sector in Australia. Government funding has often just been for not-for-profit organisations, and now we are actually seeing governments working a lot better with the private sector. So, and we're getting some better regulation outcomes for activations. I would say most of the law reforms we've just done in New South Wales are not necessarily a COVID outcome, but there are COVID components in there. So, like yourselves, I'm gravely worried about the venues. Some of the other parts of the industry can hibernate and pop up downstream. Venues need operational costs just to pay the bills. There is subsidy for wages, so many businesses can keep their staff on with a wage subsidy, but as far as their operational costs, their insurance, their loans, their utilities, they need that support now.
And I saw that Australia just passed a big arts and culture funding package. Is that the COVID relief package, or is that separate? And how nice that it comes on the heels of you successfully overhauling all this legislation.
Well, we've got three tiers of government in Australia. We've got federal funding, and there's a $250 million federal package that was announced earlier in the year. In New South Wales, there's a $30 million funding program for the arts. There's $1.16 million for contemporary music came through in the last couple of weeks. The state of Victoria have got a $15 million fund just for venues for operational costs that we identified earlier. So we're seeing different approaches from the federal government and then across the states and territories. Victoria is the only state that has that operational funding for venues at the moment. We're looking for that for New South Wales currently. But then up in the territory, the venues are operational. You know, in Darwin, the bars and the gigs are just going as usual, pretty much. Queensland's about to have 100 capacity. Western Australia, things are operational in some capacity. So it depends, you know, on where you are.
a longtime hip hop promoter named Kitty Wu, who's been with us for these couple of days and runs a venue in Seattle, and has supported many hip hop artists, is asking about regulation related to hip hop. Do you see a lot of hip hop in Australia? And is the regulation any different for hip hop than any other?
Look, absolutely. There's lots of hip hop, and I'd encourage everyone to look to get on the web and see what's happening in Western Sydney. The Hilltop Hoods out of Adelaide are a profile act nationally. There's a lot. Regarding the regulation, it's the law enforcement is my experience that can be challenged by some of those events, but we don't have the conditions on liquor licenses banning it as such. No.
Thank you. I noticed Michael Bracey's back on with us. Michael, are we at time?
We are at time. I think.
It's so nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God. Thank you, John. And congratulations on everything, and enjoy your time off, hopefully.
He's got to run off to a radio interview because I'm sure you are a man in demand right now. So thank you for spending this time with us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all. And look, I'd really love to reconvene with you when I've got more time, because there's a lot for me to learn as well.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And thanks again to Lynn and Mark and Bev for sharing their wisdom and insight. I really, again, the whole point of Music Policy Forum at its heart is trying to get outside our bubbles and trying to expand our networks and try to build relationships and try to learn from each other. And that really, again, is at the heart of what we do. We don't think there are a lot of easy answers in any of this work. And there's no 5-point plan to save the music industry pre-COVID or, in this very complicated year. So it's just so helpful to get these outside perspectives and really challenge our assumptions and be inspired and see what we can learn.